God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Woo! Good. Sure. I knew it. Suffering inside and outside of these rooms. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Marilyn.
Hey everybody, I'm Dave Dawson, I'm alcoholic. And man, what an introduction. And like Ryan, man, I'm a big crier, so we might not make it very long before the tears start flowing because I'm starting the day filled up. You know, I spent yesterday evening with Ryan and Allison, and thank you to the Pleasant Valley group for having me out here. But thank you to Allison and Ryan for opening up their home and asking me to stay with them. And so I got a little taste last night of their AA family, and I fit right in, and I felt part of it. And as I talk with some of my friends that I know here that I don't get to see all the time, and you're sharing your experience, strength, and hope with me, and man, I just feel filled to the brim here this morning, or this afternoon now. So I hope if nothing else, I hope some of what I feel on the inside comes out and touches you on the outside, right? Thanks, Bob, for being here. You know, Bob and I were talking. We got sober running around, not CDs, but listening to cassette tapes, right? And so folks like Bob record our oral history. And there's folks up here on this table who ain't with us anymore in body, but are captured, and their spirit is captured in the legacy that lives on and what folks like Bob do. So, again, be sure to support him. I got a sobriety date. It's June 23rd, 1990. I got a home group. It's called the Bowie Friday Night Speakers Group. I got a sponsor, an old guy named Stu B. And I'll give you a snapshot of Stu B. Stu got sober in 1966. And so you know, he's sober a long time. And he gave me I celebrated 34 years a couple weeks ago, and Stu gave me a chip. But when I was 32 years sober, he gives me my 32-year chip, and he says, "You made a good start, son." You know, a guy like that keeps me right about right size. You know, and I sit around and I see the legacy here, and I've had a chance to get to meet some of you who have truly been here and served Alcoholics Anonymous and set that example, as Ryan was talking about. So thank you for that. Just to get me out of the way, again, we do a lot of praying. There's going to be a whole lot of God in here tonight, and I won't be shy about it. Ryan told me, don't you be shy about God. And so one of the best ways I like to do that, for those of you who know the set-aside prayer, if you allow me, I'd like to start with a little version of that, if you bow your heads with me, and that way just maybe help get us in the place, at least the place that I need to be, or I hope I am, and maybe some in this room need to be in order to hear what God has for us this afternoon. God, please help us set aside everything we think we know about ourselves, our disease, the 12 steps, and especially you, so that we may have an open mind and a new experience of these things. God, may you help us see the truth. Amen. Amen. The best way I like to start my talk is, you know, Ryan said, you know, he talked about the second hour. I promise it'll only be one. But if you want to come back over Ryan's house tonight, we'll go on to the second and third hour of this great talk. But the best way that I know to tell my story, ironically, is it's written down on page 11 in one paragraph. Now, this book was written in 1939. It's 85 years ago. And yet I see and hear black and white probably one of the best descriptions the last 34 years for me. And so I'm going to start with that. So if nothing else, I get a chance to tell my story in a very crisp, clear way. So if you're brand new sitting in the room, you might even remember one or two sentences. Maybe you remember this. And maybe you remember the guy standing up here this afternoon believed this happened to him. And if it happened to him, I doubt it. But maybe, just maybe, it might happen to me. Maybe, just maybe, it might happen for me. And this is what it is. So I'll set the scene real quick. So when I was new, I didn't understand what this was because I heard about Bill Wilson and Bob Smith. And I knew they started this thing. And here it is in Bill's story. There's some guy showing up what looks like he's 12-stepping Bill, and I don't know who the hell he is. I thought this is Alcoholics Anonymous. Who's this guy? And so, without getting into a history talk, many of you may know that AA was kind of based off of the Oxford group, and one of Bill's friends, a guy named Ebby T., had found a spiritual experience and a spiritual solution to the disease of alcoholism in the Oxford group. And actually what became our 12 steps was originated out of their 6 steps, right? And so there's a lineage here that goes way back. It goes back thousands of years, right? But what began to happen with guys like Ebby is they began to see that there's a spiritual solution to the powerlessness of alcoholism. And so Ebby had found this, and he came to Bill, the 12th step. He came to Bill to share the good news of recovery, of a God-based spiritual power that can solve and remove alcoholism. And so Ebby came and he 12-stepped Bill, and Bill's sitting there drinking his bathtub gin, listening to Ebby Ray. He said, man, God bless the boy. He's on fire all right. Ebby said, I got religion, And but then after Ebby left, like a lot of us, something began to happen to Bill. And then Bill reflects back on it later. And this is on page 11 out of the big book. And this is what Bill says. But my friend sat before me, and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap of humanity to a level of life better than the best have ever known. Right? And I can tell you without a doubt, from June 23rd, 1990, to this guy standing up here today, that I've been taken from the scrap heap, the wreckage of humanity, no redeeming quality, no redeeming value, hopeless. Better if I died than to continue living the life that I lived. Have you had people that love you pray that you will die so the suffering will be over? Not only for them, but for you? I have. Scrap heap of humanity. And I can tell you, on the inside where I live, honestly, 100%, I've been given a level of life better than the best have ever known. On the inside. So my first sponsor, he would always say when somebody got up here and said, "Oh, where do I begin?" He would yell out, "Somewhere near the end," right? Otherwise, we'll spend 50 minutes in here being drunk, and we won't have 10 minutes on sobriety, right? And so, but I do want to talk a little bit about what I have, right? And I think it's really important, especially in the days where I'm at in the area. Sometimes we get a lot of people who aren't sure what they are come to AA. Right, and so I think it's important that we spend a little bit of time talking about the disease of alcoholism as described and the doctor's opinion, and really through what I'd say is, we go through 33 plus pages of the Roman numerals and then 44 pages of the main text before we get to the 2 big questions that decide whether or not we're an alcoholic. But before I get there, what I'd like to talk a little bit about is sort of the thing that I have. And this is what it looks like for me. I was born restless, irritable, and discontent. Now, I couldn't use those words, but that's the way I was born. And to give you an example of kind of how screwed up I was, right? You know how most kids have an imaginary friend? I had an imaginary enemy, right? So I can imagine the look on my mom's face because she knew there was something wrong with me. They already started sending me to psychiatrists and psychologists by this time. And I should say that, there was a little bit of trauma in my life. My father I got drafted in the Vietnam War and was an airborne ranger and got killed in action in 1970. And so my mom was 20 years old when that happened. And I think about that today. Man, she was a girl. And she's got this year and a half-year-old son. And now she's got to raise him for the rest of his life. And so there was some things in my life that made my life feel and look a little different to me. And that was one of those events. And so by the time I was like 4 or 5, there's some issues with Dave, And so I can imagine the look of my mom when she's sitting there talking to Mr. Bramsby, my first grade teacher. And my mom is the parent-teacher conference. You know how they have them every so often to sync up with the teachers. And my mom is saying that she's really concerned about me being bullied. Now, this is before bullying was a thing, right? But apparently this kid was really doing some damage to me. I was talking about him all the time, right? And my mom began to describe this to Mr. Bramsby, and she used the kid's name that I had told her. And I can imagine the look on my mom's face when Mr. Bramsby said, Ms. D, I don't know how to tell you this, but there is no kid by that name in this class. and And this is a small school. I don't know a kid by that name in this school. And so, when other kids are running around having imaginary friends, I got imaginary enemies, right? And so that gives you a sense just how screwed up I was. By the time I'm 13, I take my first drink. And I don't mean like a sip of mom's pina colada or the neighbor's beer. I mean the first drink where the magic happened. And I'm looking around this room and I see a few of you nodding your heads. Oh, the magic happened, And not everybody has that story. Some of us kind of ease into alcoholism, but man, I was right at it. I was programmed. I was so restless, irritable, and discontent. Man, I was just looking for something. It was like I was thirsty, before I even drank, And I got about 24 ounces of Budweiser down in the city of Richmond, Virginia, working summers loading tractor trailers, and a hot and humid day like maybe it is sometimes here, 90 degrees, 90% humidity in the back of a truck all day. 5 foot tall and 110-pound rock-solid man. That's me, 13 years old. My mom had reluctantly let me go on a weekend trip with these truck drivers that I was working a summer job for at a company that she was the accountant of. And they took me down there, and at the end of that day, we had worked hard. It's one of those, kind of cultures, right, where you work hard, you play hard. And these are kind of the men that, if you picture, guys like that, rough around the edges, blue collar, and I come from that. I'm proud of that background. It's like to work hard with your hands and sweat, And at the end of the day, we're sitting around, job's about halfway done, and we're unloading a condo of bank vice president right downtown Richmond. Nice part of Richmond down there. And we got about half of it done, and we're sitting in this beautiful condo. It's a hell of a lot nicer than anything I ever saw, right? And these real men are sitting on boxes in a half circle, and they're reaching into brown paper bags, and they're pulling out 16-ounce Budweiser cans. I was 13 years old then. I'm 56 now. Right? The fact that 43 years later, I can tell you, 16-ounce, not 12-ounce, Budweiser, not Coors, cans, not bottles, might tell you that there was something that's etched in my brain that says, man, there was something about that moment that was transformative. And one of those guys reached in the bag and threw me one of those 16-ounce Budweiser cans, and I caught it. And I didn't take that drink because I'm an alcoholic. I took that drink because I wanted to be part of Circle of Men. And I pulled up my little box, and I sat down, and I drank my 24 ounces of Budweiser, and the magic happened, man. That 5 foot tall, 110-pound kid, scared kid, restless, irritable, and discontent, right? All of a sudden, man, I'm 6'4" and 220 pounds, a rock-solid leader of men, And these guys that had been so intimidating, man, they were just my crew, And these are good, hard-drinking guys, and they saw I took to it right away, man. And so later on that night, I can remember looking at my watch, and it was after midnight, and they had smuggled me in downtown Richmond, Virginia. It's right in an area that's it's a college town, and the Virginia Commonwealth University is right downtown. And this is right there where it's at. And there's all these little bars and nightclubs that come alive on a Saturday night, and this was a Saturday night. And so they had smuggled me down into some of these little basement nightclub bars, and they were feeding me Budweiser and slow gin. That's just a terrible thing to do to a 13-year-old kid, And so I come to the next morning, and I'm alone in the city of Richmond, Virginia. And I feel terrible in a way that I have never felt that terrible. I don't know if I ever felt that terrible, right? But I felt bad. You know how it is, right? And I look around and the ceiling's red. And it don't smell good. And the wall's red. And I'm red. And apparently and I'm all alone, right? And what had happened that night is I had apparently drank as much as I could. Went into a blackout right off the bat. Apparently wanted to fight with the truck drivers, right? And, when you're 13-year-old and drunk and want to be a truck driver, you're not a threat. You're just entertainment for the evening. You're just part of the crew, like, look at the kid, man. Get him all spun up. Push him a little bit. See what he does, And apparently, at 3 in the morning, by the time they got, and I started projectile vomiting, slow gin and beer mixed, whoever it was in the bed next to me decided they would leave me in that room alone. But what happened was I came to the next day, and I had that, I had that fear, shame, and remorse, right? I had those four horsemen right on me. And somehow nobody had to teach me. And I wasn't a 6'4", 220-pound rock-solid leader of men anymore. I was a scared little 5 foot tall, 110-pound kid. And nobody had to teach me what to do in that moment. I somehow intuitively knew that what I wasn't supposed to do was to go out and try to find an adult and say, hey, I'm a 13-year-old kid, and I don't know what's happening. I'm all alone in a strange city, and I don't know where my people are, and I'm scared. I knew that wasn't the answer. I somehow knew that the answer was you don't talk about that. You push that fear and shame and remorse and guilt, you push that way down inside where nobody can see it. And you get yourself cleaned up, and you put your clothes on, and you walk out that door like you remember everything that happened, and if you don't, you ain't ashamed of it. And that began to build the brick. Put one brick in the wall between me and you and me and God. And over the years, what happened is when I drank like that. Now, I didn't quit school the next day but every time I drank like that. And I began to build my wall, right? I began to wall myself off. And by the time I'm 16 and 17, I'm beginning to do things like drink and drive. I'm beginning to do all kinds of things that I knew weren't right. I was taught well. Not everybody has that experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. Allison and I were talking about last night about the blessing of being taught well. And I was taught well, so it was very apparent to me very quickly that the way I was living was not the way I was supposed to be living. By the time I'm 19 years old, I'm drinking every day and I'm running the streets and I'm doing a whole bunch of other stuff that I was not raised to do. I'm not working anymore. And I came home after about a 3 or 4 day straight run, and I'd stolen a bunch from the people that loved me. And I had been trying to quit drinking on and off, probably for a year at that point. And I pulled out the handgun that I'd been carrying, because when you do live the life I live, you need a handgun. And you just can't have any handgun. You got to have a handgun with the serial numbers filed off, right? And I pulled out that .357 Magnum, and I pulled the hammer back, and I put that barrel in my mouth, and I looked into the eyes of a young man in the mirror with tears running down his face, and I didn't know who he was, and I didn't know how I had gotten there. I was just so baffled. And our big book talks about a jumping off place where we wish for the end, where we can't imagine life with or without alcohol anymore. It talks about pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. Those are big words. But I think about me in the mirror with that gun in my mouth and about 2.5 pounds of force on that 5 or 6 pound trigger. And I couldn't do it. And a thought came to me, because people have been trying to help me for a while now. I told you I was going to psychologists and psychiatrists before I took a drink. If they had had an answer for me, I wouldn't have had to take a drink. Alcohol solved my restless, irritable, and discontent. I'm not a problem drinker. I'm an answer drinker. I don't know about anybody else in here, but alcohol is my answer to my problem. My problem is I don't know how to live sober, right? And you all know that the answer that we have here in Alcoholics Anonymous is how to live sober without alcohol. That's the power of the 12 steps. And I didn't know that yet, so I'm standing there with a gun in my mouth, and one of those psychiatrists or psychologists had told me, my grandfather, I'll tell you a little story about my grandfather real quick, because we're going to circle back on this in a second. My grandfather in 1969, when my father was in Vietnam, swore that if God brought my dad back alive, that he'd never take another drink. My grandfather's one of us, so he couldn't keep that promise. He drank again. When my father got killed in action in April 1970, my grandfather blamed himself and kept on drinking for another 2 years. And in 1972, a guy named Bobby, still alive. I saw him 2 weeks ago. Bobby had 9 months sober and went with a couple other guys to go 12-step my grandfather. And Bobby just celebrated 52 years, right? So that's kind of, we're gonna get a little bit closer. So I'm 10 years old. So I know my grandfather's sober in AA. In 1972, I was 4 years old, and I remember going to my grandfather's first anniversary. And they should have known as an alcoholic, because they asked for the family to stand up. I stood up in the front row. Everybody else sat down. They had to pull me down. I'm still wanting to stand up. Hey, look at me, right? It's an alcoholic, right? And Megan probably said, "Save that kid a seat, where he's going to need it," And I grew up around you. I went fishing with Bobby and my grandfather and Bill Kay and a bunch of these old drunks. I grew up around them. I knew Alcoholics Anonymous, and my grandfather died sober in 1987 before I came to you all. But 19 years old, I'm standing there with a gun in my mouth not too long after my grandfather died, in fact. And the thought come to me, maybe I ought to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. But see, I knew what Alcoholics Anonymous was, so I put it off as long as I could. Right? Because I knew this is like a not drinking at all program, right? I mean, my grandfather was one of those old crusty guys, had to beat up old pickup truck and had the 1 day at a time bumper sticker on it, right? And I thought, I know that's a bunch of crap, right? Because, my grandfather didn't drink for, 10, 13 years, right? And he died sober. Shit, Bobby's been sober like 30 years at this point. I said, man, these guys, they're not drinking ever, right? And I don't want a not drinking at all program. I want I want to make some counseling and drink a little less, I wanted an easier, softer way. What I thought might be an easier, softer way. And anyway, so I knew what Alcoholics Anonymous was, and I decided I'd go to AA. And I came to my first meeting in Alcoholics Anonymous the next night. And I told you, Bobby 12-stepped my grandfather, 1972. I was 10 years old, and my mom, a single mom, right, so every now and again, I'd wind up with the grandparents, right, while she was doing whatever mom things do when they're not momming us, right, and probably wanted a day away from me or something, right, because I'm a lot of work, right. My wife would tell you I'm still high maintenance, right. Imagine how high maintenance I was at 10 years old. So my grandfather's got me, gets a phone call, and what I find out later is a 12-step call. So my grandfather takes me on this 12-step call, right. I don't know why he did, but he did, and we go 12-step this guy Bill K. Now Bill K is old money. Like Roland H. old money, like that kind of old money. Got a big house on the waterfront on the Chesapeake Bay. I go down there, and Bill K's drinking, right? And my grandfather's there with me, doesn't know what to do. My grandfather has to use the bathroom. So while my grandfather's in the bathroom, Bill K finds out I like guns. So Bill K goes and gets me a 12-gauge shotgun and tells me to shoot some squirrels out in the yard. So my grandfather walks out of the bathroom with me, 10 years old, with a 12-gauge shotgun and says, what the, It's only later that I found out that, Bill K got sober. And then Bill K started joining those fishing trips with Bobby and my grandfather. And then probably about 5 years after that, Bill K 12-stepped a guy named Vinny S. Right? And Vinny S got sober. And Vinny S is still sober. In fact, Vinny S and Bobby are in the same home group with my sponsor. So when I want to feel like a newcomer, I go over their group. And so I had that gun in my mouth, and the next night I went to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. When I walked in the door, you know who shook my hand? Vinny S. Vinny S. I didn't put that story together until Vinny S.'s anniversary. And so really the hand of Alcoholics Anonymous, generation after generation, led to Vinny S. with this big smile and this warm handshake as I walked in that young people's meeting, 19 years old. I didn't get it, man. I came here thinking, man, I'm young and strong and proud. I don't know about you. I'm not even a legal drinking age in the state of Maryland at the time, right? And so what happened for me was that began a period of 3.5 years. And I forget who I was talking to before the meeting, and we were talking about the hell, how Alcoholics Anonymous ruins your drinking, right? You come here, whether you don't think you're that bad yet or not, and you all ruin my drinking. Because I tell you what, I couldn't walk into those bars and nightclubs anymore. I couldn't take that drink in my quiet, still moments, even by myself, and not think about you. And on the other hand, when I come in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous for 3.5 years and picked up enough one-day chips, you could have played poker with them, right? When I come in and I sit with you, there was part of me in the beginning thought I wasn't as bad, and by the time we got to 1989, 1990, I knew there was something wrong with me that you all didn't have. I'd read things like, talk about those unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way, right? I thought, that's me. I'm constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself. And in March of 1990, I sat in a meeting, and I was about ready to get another one-day chip. And to give you a sense of powerlessness for me, it had been a period of time where my grandparents spent a bunch of their life saying they weren't rich people. They were poor middle-class people, sort of maybe lower end of blue collar, and they spent a bunch of money to send me to rehab to try to keep me from dying. And I got out of rehab, and I went to 90 and 90, right? Got me a relapse prevention plan, right? Show you where I was on the Jellinek curve. I'm coming up out of that pit, right? Identified my triggers, and taking my antabuse. And with 1 day short of 6 months sober, I drank on antabuse. Because I'm a real alcoholic, man. And I didn't stop taking it. I took that pill before I walked out that door that night. But I tell you what, man, I am you think I'm restless, irritable, and discontent, before I drink. Man, you let me be dry for damn near 6 months, and man, it is like every day, it is hanging, it is white knuckle fingernails on the chalkboard, man. It is painful. And I had to drink or blow my brains out. And I drank, and that sat me in the meeting about 3 days later. And there was a guy standing up at the podium in a suit, That's why I stand up here in a suit. Well, Ryan probably wouldn't let me down if it didn't show up that way, but that's the way I was taught. I was taught that way. I was taught, respect Alcoholics Anonymous, and you dress different, you use different language than you did out there. Right, so you'd maybe be a good example. If nothing else, that guy might say, hey, mister, where'd you get that suit? Right? Hear a little different language in here. A little more talk about God and a little less vulgarity and inappropriate language, a little different feeling here than there is out there. And so what happened is I'm listening to this guy talking. What he's talking about is the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, that's the program recovery. It ain't 90 meetings in 90 days. Don't get me wrong. Nothing wrong with meetings. I love meetings, right? I love fellowship. I love hanging out with Ryan and Allison and all the crew last night. I love hanging out with you tonight after I'm done. I especially love it when I'm done here, right? And but he talked about 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, that was the program recovery. And I went up to him after, and I don't know how you ask for help when you're broken and defeated and destroyed, and I got a one-day chip that night. And after the meeting, this guy was popular. He was a good speaker. And he'd been sober about 10 years. And people were like, glad handing him, and he's pushing them out of the way to get to me. And I walked up to Tom, and I couldn't even look at him in the eye. You remember how you couldn't look people in the eye? Oh, yeah. I couldn't even look him in the eye, and I looked down at my shoes, and I said, I said, Tom, I don't mean to interrupt you. I know you got a lot of people want to talk to you here. I said, but do you think maybe, I don't know, sometime in the next, a couple weeks we could get 5 minutes to talk about these steps, because I can't stay sober, and I really think maybe these 12 steps are a thing, and maybe you can talk to me about it. And I forget, man, that guy reached into his pocket, and he pulled out a business card, and he said, do you got a car? And I said, well, yeah. He said, you have insurance? Yeah. He said, and a license? I said, yeah. He said, damn, He said, there's a Department of Motor Vehicles in Glen Burnie, Maryland. Can you meet me there at 7 o'clock tomorrow night? He said, I bet you know where that Department of Motor Vehicles is. I said, yeah, I've been to court there a few times. He said, I thought you might have. He said, can you meet me there at Denny's tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, and we'll talk tomorrow night. And what he introduced me to was not a program of maybe we'll get to you, well, come back here next week and we'll see if you're still sober. He introduced me to a program of action of, hey, do you have the means to take some action to see me tomorrow? And if you do, you show up there and I will give you the help. If you're willing to put a little bit of effort into your sobriety, man, I'll match you tenfold. And so I showed up to that. Amen, right? That's what you all do. I see you doing it. I see you doing it, and I hear the stories of you doing it. And I showed up that next night, and that man began to spoon feed me Alcoholics Anonymous right out of this book. And I got through 1, 2, 3 with him, and then I had a little vacation planned to California. And I have these, I don't know about you, but for me, I'm a powerless alcoholic. And the insanity of the second step for me is not the crazy shit that I do when I'm drinking. My nickname, by the way, is Crazy Dave. It's not Gangster Dave or Tough Guy Dave. When I'm drinking, it is Crazy Dave. I was a big guy. I might burst into tears at the bar, right? You might be, oh, you're my best friend ever. And then I might pull out my handgun and shoot it next to your ear just to get a reaction. And I began to get this nickname Crazy Dave. Not like crazy, like, oh, Crazy Dave. Like, no, like put away in an asylum kind of Crazy Dave. Right? And what I found out, it's not the crazy things I do when I'm drinking. It's walking into a bar in Tijuana, Mexico with 3 months of sobriety, physically sober as I am tonight. And my mind tells me I'm not an alcoholic in Mexico. Do you have an alcoholic mind and things like that? It looks for any crack, any delusion, anything that it can tell you to get you to drink again. That's the way my disease shows itself, right? And of course I drank, and that began the end. June 22nd, 1990 was not a good day. I don't know about you on your last day, but I did not come here on a positive run. I did not come here with everything in my life straightened out and just looking to grow spiritually. I got picked up out of jail that morning by my grandfather. My grandfather was like my dad to me. He's a, World War II vet, just the greatest, a picture of the greatest generation. Word was his bond, didn't have a lot of money, worked hard his whole life, that kind of guy. My grandfather's kind of guy when my dad went off to Vietnam, he promised my father that if he didn't make it back, that he'd raise me as his own son. And that man kept his word from 1968 when he made that promise, all the way through to when he took his last breath in 2008. And for all intents and purposes, he's my dad. And he's picked me up from jail that morning, and we have the quiet ride, because now there's been a couple years of this. You know how we hurt and destroy the people that love us the most. I mean, all the other people are gone. The only people that are left are the people that love me. They're the people that stand in the middle of the tornado and just get ripped to shreds because they love you so damn much. And him and my grandmother were those people for me. You know, my mom, I talked to her today. My mom celebrated 35 years today, right? But at the time, my mom had done her own geographic with my stepdad. Now, I'd remind her sometimes that she was my mom. I'd call her about 3 o'clock in the morning. It's all your fault, phone call drunk. You know, that's the kind of damage I did to my mom. Did y'all make those phone calls? It's all your fault. It's all your fault. And I can't imagine getting those phone calls as a parent. Right? And so my grandfather picked me up out of jail that morning. We had the quiet ride back. We don't make the promises anymore. We don't even talk about it. And I get away from him as quick as I am because I got to take a drink or else I'm going to blow my brains out. You know. And I drank all day and into the night, closed down the bars that night. And it wasn't a good day, it wasn't a bad day. It was just a day of just trying to keep from eating gun again. Just a day of just trying to get through one more day, man. And at the end of that day, you know, bottom line is I got in a fight with a guy who was going to sit in front seat of the car on the way home from the bar. And we were on the second story of a parking garage in downtown Baltimore. And I started the fight. And the guy, I don't think he meant to do it, but he tackled me. And I went out. You know, I'll give you a little bit of parking garage architecture, right? So you know, if you haven't noticed, like multi-story parking garages, usually on the, you know, once you get above the first floor, they put like concrete walls up. So people like me, when they're drunk, don't drive off the parking garage. So something stops you. But then usually there's like a gap between that concrete wall, it's about as high as your shoulders, and the next floor. Well, when this guy tackled me, I went out that hole, and I fell 20 feet and landed on my head on the concrete sidewalk of Lombard Street in downtown Baltimore, and it cracked my skull from one side to the next. Now, it's been a while. It's gone down a bit, but I still have a ridge. It runs around. And if I put on a ball cap, Ryan, watch tonight, you'll see it. It just kind of leans over a bit. It's still not straight. It's kind of crooked. It leans over a little bit. That's not a fashion statement. That's a fractured skull that didn't quite heal straight. So here's what happened. Early hours of the morning, June 23rd, 1990, I'm laying in a hospital bed. Skull's cracked from one side, the other, blood's coming out of my ears. I'm covered in vomit, I'm paralyzed. And the doctors are telling my family, those grandparents that loved me like a son and watched me torture myself and destroy them for the last 3.5 years. And he's telling them that it's over, that I won't live through the night, my brain's swelling uncontrollably, that the bleeding won't stop, and that I either die or I'll be brain dead. That's my prognosis, early hours of the morning of June 23rd, 1990. And my grandfather, that night I'd come to for moments and I'd be out for hours, and I came to and he's holding my hand, and I can feel the life draining out of me. I can feel, you know, in Dante's book, The Inferno, they describe levels of hell. You know, we think about the fiery gates a lot of times when people describe that. That's early on. The lowest level of hell in Dante's book is a cold, frozen lake devoid of hope. And that's the best description of what I can tell you I felt laying in that bed, dying, cold, to the marrow of my bones, devoid of hope, knowing that my life was over, and knowing that the only legacy, the only thing I would leave behind was more pain and suffering for those people who dared to love me. You know, and I remember it's like I screamed on the inside, man, this is not the life I was supposed to live. This is not the death I'm supposed to die. But here I am, and it is over. Over. And I looked up at my grandfather with what he told me was later tearing my eyes. And I asked him if I'm going to die. I already knew the answer, but I asked him, and he was old school World War II vet. Guys don't cry. That kind of man, you know. And I watched a tear run down his cheek, and his hand began to shake in mine. And I said the most sincere, humble prayer I've ever said before since. I think it was my third step prayer. I said, God, please help me. I said that with the prayer of a desperate, dying drunk. Now, I didn't get the Bill Wilson God in my room bright light experience. You know, I didn't get, for those of you who remember the peppermint patty commercials, you know, with a cool wind blowing through you on the mountaintop. No, I didn't get any of that. Or like a Budweiser commercial with the Clydesdales come flowing through in the middle of a summer day and be a cool breeze across. No, I didn't get any of that. I came to the next time, and it was 4 a.m. And I can hear what turns out was my grandmother's pastor giving me the last rites. And as that man was finishing that prayer, and the prayer was sort of like this: God, may you find forgiveness for David in his next life, for this life is over. And as my eyes kind of came to and I became fully conscious, I saw him walk out the door, and I looked across the room, and there's Tom F. Remember the guy I was telling you about who I went up to, and he pulled his, you know, the guy who started working the steps with me? That man had never stopped. When I didn't come back anymore after that trip to California, he called my grandmother, and he found out what was going on. And he gave her his number. And he said, the time may come when it seems like all's lost. The time may come when it seems like David is without hope. And if you call me, I will come. And so my grandmother, when she got the word from those doctors, she pulled out that little slip of paper. And this is before cell phones, man. This is payphone and landline on the nightstand kind of night, right? And she called on that payphone from the hospital, and she said, Tom, I thought you'd want to know he won't make it through the night. And if you would you pray for him? He didn't pray. He came. He came. Because that's what we do. That's what we do. When everybody else leaves, we show up. And that man showed up for me. And when my eyes locked on his, and he's standing, I don't know how long he was there for 2 hours, I was told. Nobody else is left. It's just him and me. And my eyes locked onto his, and I watched. It was as if God looked at his broken child, and a look of love, conviction, and compassion. Words fail me to describe what I saw. He walked over, and he took his hand, and he looked down at my broken body. And I'm covered in vomit. I'm bleeding. I'm paralyzed. I mean, they can't stop it. It is over. And when the pastor says it's done, when the medical doctor says it's done, when the family says it's done, that man reaches down and he puts his hand on my shoulder. He says, it never has to be this way again, son. And what he knows is it might be just beginning. That perhaps from this desperation may come a crack in alcoholism where maybe enough willingness can come in. If the right teacher shows up at the right time and the 12 steps come in, that maybe a miracle can happen here. And that's exactly what happened for me. That's exactly what happened for me. And he didn't just come back that night. He came back the next day and he brought you. I never asked for you to come. There's a responsibility pledge in Alcoholics Anonymous that says when anyone anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA always to be there, and for that I am responsible. You're right. He hadn't forgotten that. And he came back and he brought you. And you came back day after day, week after week to that hospital, and he brought you and you spoon-fed me hope. Spoon-fed me. I mean, you come in, you'd have a meeting for me, and I'd just get a little bit of light, just a little bit of, not enough to blind me, but just enough to get me through that hour. And then as soon as you would leave, the demons and the voices would come on me, and they'd try to pull me back, man, and they'd say, oh, you'll never get that. And then you'd come back again, and we were in the battle, man. It was like, the way I describe it, man, it's like Special Forces AA, man. I'm like behind enemy lines, literally in hell. And these Alcoholics Anonymous is coming across the lines to pull my ass back. Right? That's the kind of AA I got sober with, man. The kind of AA that'll do that. Not just come one time. It's the kind of AA that'll get you in a car and drive past 50 perfectly good meetings that go to a meeting 3 states away. Right? That kind of AA, right? That's the kind of AA I see here. I know I'm at home here. I can feel it. I can see it, right? That's the kind of Alcoholics Anonymous I got sober with. When they finally let me out of the hospital, they sent me home paralyzed and broken, traumatic brain injury. You're going to be severely disabled the rest of your life. And the family's left with this. My grandparents were in their late 60s. And now they got their 22-year-old grandson who's going to be disabled the rest of their life stuck with them. Imagine how they felt that day when I got home. I'm not home an hour, doorbell rings, 4 members from my home group, led by my sponsor, Tom, sit at my dining room table. And they brought a meeting to my house because they heard I physically couldn't get out and go to a meeting. And again, that happened day after day, week after week. Then you got me in a car and you took me to, past 50 perfectly good meetings 3 states away. And I tell you what, man, step 1, 2, and 3 was not hard for me. We spend so much of the big book, right? So much of the all the Roman numerals and then the first 44 pages to get to the beginning of We Agnostics, right? And and it's such a powerful, powerful thing, right? It says, hey, once you start drinking, you have little or no control over the amount you take? Yes, Tom. Hey, Dave, when you quit, can you stay quit? No, Tom. Guess what, Dave? You're probably an alcoholic. And by the way, that's an or statement. It says you're probably an alcoholic if you got either one of those. If you got both, man, I've heard your story. I see what you look like. You're still paralyzed. I bet you're an alcoholic. He said, are you so paralyzed? He said, let me ask you this, Dave. He said, have you ever had no knob on your side of a door? I said, what do you mean, Tom? He said, you can't get out. I said, like a jail cell? Yeah. Like a mental institution? Yeah. Like there is no knob on your side of the door. I said, yeah, Tom, that's happened to me. He said, if you want a lesson in paralysis, he said, that doesn't happen to normal people. He said, when they lock you away and don't give you no knob, you're probably powerless. And I said, you're right, Tom. Right? And I tell you what, I was sober a couple months, and I began to do this thing, man. You were just spooning. I'm still paralyzed. Nothing's changed on the outside, man, but I'm getting hope on the inside, and hope's a powerful thing. And we got to that part in the book, I'm going to go to it now, and then I promise we're going to get going. But boy, for whatever reason, I said I wasn't going to talk a lot about getting sober, but boy, I sure did. And it's the way it goes. I guess somebody needs to hear it tonight. And and we get to that. We get to this part and how it works, right? And we read part of it tonight. I love the original manuscript where it says, if you're not convinced, try again, reread it. If you're not, throw it away, right? Because I was convinced of the ABCs. There was no doubt. I'm still paralyzed. I can see, that I'm alcoholic and couldn't manage my own life. I could see that probably no human power could relieve my alcoholism. I could see, not in me, but I could see it in Tom. I believe in Tom's God, right? And maybe, just maybe. It doesn't say that I have to fully believe. It says, do you now believe or are you willing to believe? The carpenter, 2,000 years before this was written, had a guy whose kid was dying. And he asked the guy, he said, if you believe, your kid will be made well. And what that guy said, who must have been alcoholic like me, he said, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief, right? And that's the way I felt like man, I want to believe. I can see it in you. Tom helped me, and Tom lent me his God, And by the time I got to, I love the line up to 60. I think some of the most powerful promises are actually on the bottom of 62 and 63, right? I think those are some of the most, because I'm 2 months sober. I'm wrecked still, right? And all of a sudden, what happens for me is it talks about stop playing God and make a decision to turn my will and life, right? It's talking about that at the bottom of 62, and I'm like, I'm in. I am all in. There is nothing left, man. I got everything I got in, right? And it says, so if God's going to be my director, if he's the principal, I'm his agent. If he's the father, I'm his child, right? If I make that decision, man, it tells me all sorts of remarkable things followed. And I'm 2 months sober, and it says we have a new employer being all powerful. He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves. Our little plans and designs, more and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life as we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence. We began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, and the hereafter. We were reborn. I'm 2 months sober. I'm not an emotional guy like I am today. I'm like Ryan, man. I still got everything stuffed down inside, and I'm hard on the outside. And all of a sudden, man, I start getting what I'm getting right now. Is I don't know what's going on, but I call my sponsor, and what I thought I was losing my mind, because we had just done that part of the book, and I start crying, and snot's coming out of my nose, and there ain't no Zoom. We ain't doing this face to face, right? I got him on the phone on the landline again, and I said, and I'm blubbering. My sponsor, experienced guy, right? He worked with a lot of new guys. And he let me go on for a while. And finally I blurted out, Tom, am I losing it? I can't really talk either. By the way, I talk like this. Tom, am I losing it? Am I losing it, right? Because I'm paralyzed. And I could just imagine, he always had his cup of coffee. And whenever, he'd just take a sip and then just bam, he hit you with it. And it's almost like I could imagine him taking a sip of coffee, listening to this and smiling. He said, oh, no, son, you're getting it. He said, you ain't losing your mind. You're having a spiritual experience. He said, you're waking up. He said, don't stop. And I said that third step prayer on the shores of the Severn River in a spiritual retreat, and I was telling this story just last night. I got around a group of you all kind of away from just going to meetings, and we spent a whole weekend together, and I did my fourth and fifth step. Did my fifth step. I'd already had my fourth step done. Did my fifth step with my sponsor, and then we did 6 and 7. So I went in on 4 and came out on 8, And I got done telling. I stood on the shores of the Severn River overlooking the U.S. Naval Academy, not far from where I live now, and I got done telling this guy who's old enough to be my grandfather exactly who and what I was, and I couldn't look at him. And the tears were dripping on my shoes, and that man reached up, and he's a little Irish guy, and he reached up and he grabbed me around the shoulder and he pulled me into his shoulders, and he whispered in my ear. He said, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous, Dave. You may never have to drink again. He said, oh, I love you so much, son, and God loves you so much, right? And what you introduced me to, I didn't realize it until later, that I couldn't have the first word of the first step until I had shared exactly who and what I was with another human being and be loved, not judged. And that is such a powerful thing. I thought about that sitting at Allison and Ryan's last night. I thought about the power of belonging. Of belonging. And I belong here. I could feel that last night. I belong. I belong. You know me and you love me anyway. You know, the psychologists tell us there is nothing more that a human being can want to be the best that they can be than to be truly their authentic self with another human being and be loved, not judged for it. And that's what we do every day, in and out, is we love and not judge. We share the wreckage of our alcoholism. We share the challenges, the trials and low spots of our sobriety. And we love each other through it. And we come along beside each other. When everybody else runs away, we come. We show up and we stay. You know, and I came all the way in, I sat all the way down, and I stayed, and I've been staying for the last 34 years. You know. You know, I went on through the steps, and at the end of that first year, I call it my year of angels and miracles. And you know, I was sober about 3 months when I went to a neurologist one day, and he threw 2 MRIs up on the screen. I was going to stay that way the rest of my life. And I never forget the confused look on the neurologist when he looked at me, and he looked at the MRIs, and he looked at me, and he looked at MRIs again, he looked at one, the other, and the 2 images on the screen were 2 weeks apart. One from 2 weeks ago before I had done that third step and had that spiritual experience I described to you. Another a day before I went and saw him, after I'd had that spiritual experience. And he looked at me with a baffled look, and he said, "Son, I can't describe it. I can't explain it." He said, "But your brain has been rebuilt in 2 weeks, and you're not going to be paralyzed anymore." And the next day I wasn't paralyzed. Now it's above my spiritual pay grade, right, to try to explain why it is that God gives somebody like me a big miracle and maybe not another drunk who walks in the door, like the guy Jeff that I sponsor who had a similar accident. Jeff's sober 15 years. He just didn't have the big miracle. But I'm certain that he wants me to tell you, for those of you who are sitting in the room, that there's enough power in Alcoholics Anonymous to take a guy laying in the bed that's supposed to be dead and make him alive. The guy's paralyzed and make him whole, right? To take a guy who's a scrap heap of humanity that the best they can do is hope that he dies so that he doesn't hurt himself or others anymore, and give him a life that is really better than the best they've ever known. You know, that first year, you know, I went through the 12 steps. I started sponsoring people. I got in the middle of the boat, right, and I have been ever since, really. Not perfectly, not brilliantly, but consistently. I found out that there's a lot of power in consistency. Alcoholics Anonymous taught me how to put consistency in other areas of my life, right? My sponsor taught me how to show up early, right? Find a group of winners. See what you can bring to them. You know what, that works really well in college. I went back, once I got unparalyzed, I didn't know what the hell to do, and I happened to be at that Jesuit retreat center where I did that fifth step, and my sponsor told me to go talk to Father K, who was a Jesuit priest and an academic. And I said, "Father, should I go back to college?" He said, "Well, I heard you just told me your story." He said, "Jesus, God raised you from the dead. Do you think he can put you through school if you want?" and what you all taught me is that it's okay to try something and fail. But it's not okay to quit or to be so afraid that you don't ever try. Amen. And on that basic principle, I went back to college. And we don't have a lot of time, but bottom line is, you know, I got 3 college degrees now. And the last one's got a PhD after it. Don't stand for poor, helpless, drunk. Right now, the fact that a God can take a guy like me who used to fail those classes and as an undergraduate and allow me to teach them is a testament to the power that lies here. Right? And that, you know, that's just an outward expression of the inward change and the power that I've been able to tap into. You know, I tell you what, between 2 and 4 years, my ego tried to kill me. You know, I don't know if you all have those kind of experiences, like where, you know, I got a year sober. I'm like, yeah, I got this alcohol. I am Mr. AA. You know, and I was inches and seconds away from drinking multiple times. You know, I got me a blonde mullet. Bought a Corvette on some student loans. You know, chasing her around, you know, you know, and you know, so those are the kind of way I was living for a while, but my feet kept me in AA, even though my ego was trying to kill me. You know, a guy named Harry Thibault talks about in a paper he wrote called Eager Factors and Surrender of Alcoholism. He talks about people like me. He said, man, alcoholics, drunk or sober, he said it's like a run and gun battle with the ego, and it still is, you know. And I was about 4 years sober when I met my wife, and if we make it another week, we'll be married 28 years. And I met her in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Boy meets girl on AA campus, right? And in the front of my big book is is my friend Virginia O gave us was there's a little triangle in here, and she told me, she said, and there's Dave and April at the corner, and there's God up here, right? And she said, if the two of you will grow towards God in Alcoholics Anonymous, she said, you'll grow closer together, not further apart. She said it can work. She said, just a question about where you're focused. Are you focused on this and God? And if so, you'll get closer together. Yeah, there'll be some friction along the ways, and you'll wave a little bit, which we have. You spent almost 30 years with somebody, and man, we've gone through a lot of phases of life. But we both remain consistently committed to Alcoholics Anonymous, you know. And we brought a couple kids into this world, and my daughter Summer's 26, and my son James is 22. They've never seen their parents drink, you know. And I've got to be a dad. Now, let me tell you, me becoming a father was a process. And if there's anybody that's got, you know, young kids or a new father, and you know, I grew up without a dad. I had some people who tried to fill in, but I didn't. You know, I knew the kind of dad I wanted to be, and then there was the kind of dad I was, right? And when you're a selfish, self-centered alcoholic, even, you know, my daughter was born in 1998. I was 8 years sober, and I didn't realize how selfish and self-centered I still was at the time until we had this kid. And I tell you what, man, you start to see it. It puts a mirror up in front of you of the selfishness and the self-centeredness that you have. And it like to break me because I was so far from being the father that I wanted to be. And I could see my wife struggling with me trying to become a dad. But she stuck with it. You know, and you all taught me how to show up. You all taught me how to make amends. You all taught me how to screw up. You taught me how to make amends to my kids when I screw up over and over and over again. Right? So many times until they're telling me, you know, I don't want to hear it anymore, Dad. I want you to start acting different. Right? So when I talk about 34 years of sobriety, it's like the stock market, folks. Right? You know, if you plot, you know, June 23rd, 1990, stock market's 2,900. S&P 500 is 2,900. If you plot it today, it's about 41,000. That looks like a nice straight line, man. That's a good investment. AA has been a great investment. But I tell you what, man, 2000 to 2010 was rocky. You know, it was flat. It was some down days, man. Right? You know, that's the way my sobriety has been. And it's been in those trials and low spots that I've needed you most. Right? It's not our accomplishments, our virtues, our triumphs. Sure, we're there to share those. It's the certain trials and low spots. Ryan and I were talking about some of the things that have been going on with it. And sometimes it's nothing to do with us. It's just life, man. People get sick, people die. Right? But I had a chance to live this thing. You know, we raised these kids. I built a house right next door to those grandparents who watched me die. And some of the greatest amends that I made to them was watching my kids run out our front door and make a right turn, run 200 feet into great-grandma and great-granddad's house. You know, when I made my amends to my grandmother and I told her that one of the things I was 3 months sober, I said, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to take care of you the way you took care of me in your old age. She laughed at me. It was absolutely incomprehensible. She said, oh, honey, why don't you just stay in Alcoholics Anonymous and try to start by taking care of yourself, right? And probably 2002, they began to get old and say, I'm 12 years sober now. Those kids are growing up, and they're right next door. And I'm over there, and I'm at all the doctor's appointments, all the operations, all the surgeries. I'm the one they call when they screw up the finances. My grandfather called me the number one son. My name's on all the bank accounts, and I'm trusted to do what others can't do in that family. And I was there when they both took their last breath, because you all taught me when others can't be there, I can be there. You told me how to watch and pray. You told me how to hold their hand the way they held my hand when I watched them die. And when my grandfather's the last one to go, and he told me before he died, he said, I want you to do my funeral service for me. And he said, and David, please don't drink. Please don't drink. And I said, I hear you. I said, I'm not going to. And what it reminded me of, it was kind of a part of that went further, and it said it wasn't just about don't drink. It was about we want you to continue to try to become the man that we know you can be and that God has intentions for you to be. Don't stop growing. Don't stop doing this, man. Stay all the way in. Come in, sit all the way down, and just stay and keep doing this, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And I'm near the end now, and but I want to give you just a little quick kind of snapshot of what the years have looked like. You know, I had those early days of sobriety, man, where it was just freaking magic, right? It's just magic. Miracles, miracles and hope by the bucketful, right? And then I had the ego trying to kill me, and ego still tries to kill me. It's not quite as overt as it was at 2 to 5, you know. By the way, we lose about a quarter of Alcoholics Anonymous in that time range because the ego comes back and kills us. A quarter of us don't make a year, another quarter of us don't make it past 5, right? And I don't understand why. And then that long slog of just, man, trying to put these principles in my life and be a parent and at work. I mean, you know, because of course I want to be number one. I'm more of a Bill Wilson. Ryan and I were talking. I'm a little more wired like a Bill W. than a Dr. Bob. I wish I was more Dr. Bobish. I really do. But I'm just not, you know. And so it didn't matter, you know, if there's a college degree to get, I got to get the top one. If there's a job to have, I got to be at the top of the ladder. And what I found out is ladders aren't spiritual. In any area of my life, if I got a ladder and I'm looking at rungs above and below, man, I'm not in the right place, you know. And Alcoholics Anonymous, too. Bill Wilson talks about that in his emotional sobriety piece, that you know, even dependency, unhealthy dependencies on how we fit and where we are in Alcoholics Anonymous, that can also be a problem, right? That we got to be right-sized, right? That it has to be all about love in all areas of my life. And it took me a long time to kind of begin to get that at first really was with you. I've always been at my best when I'm with you. And then as I began to grow in 10 to 15 years of sobriety, I began to become a decent member of my family. You know, and then by the time I'm 20, 25, 30 years sober, I'm actually starting to become that same guy in those first two areas at work. Not perfectly, but the kind of guy that gets a reputation for being fun, having a smile on his face. You know, instead of being the guy that Dave's intense. That's what a boss told me in 2009. You're intense, you know, which means that, like, you do it my way, or I'm gonna give you some friction, you know, and that's not sober. I had a chance to live in England for 3 years. You know, I got a chance to go there for work, and I wound up 20 years ago getting an opportunity to go to work for the U.S. government in the intelligence community, keeping guys like my dad safe. You know, trying to protect our war fighters in places at the time like Iraq and Afghanistan, right? And God bless them, you know, wherever they are today. Because we're operating all over the world all the time, right? And I get a chance to be in the middle of that and try to help keep those folks safe. And I got a chance to go over to work with our Brit friends and live there for a couple of years. And I got to meet AA in England, you know. And by the time I left 3 years later, I got an AA family in England. I'll be back there in another month, and I'll get to see my AA family. Or whenever I come over there, man, they roll out the red carpet. We have dinners, and you know, it's amazing. And my buddy Martin over there is one of the finest members of Alcoholics Anonymous I know. You know, and so my family's become international in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I find those pockets of enthusiasm like here everywhere. And you know, and over the last few years, I call it my almost an old timer phase, right? I can't quite compete with this crew, right? Or Dave in the back, but I feel like I'm starting to get to where things just don't matter as much on the outside, man. I'm not so much worried about what people think about me, right? And you know, when we were in England, I kind of end with this story. So before I get there, right, before I close up, right, I want you to know, man, that everything that I have that is decent worthwhile in this world, and it's enormous. It's enormous. When I talk about a level of life better than the best I've ever known, that's real for me on the inside, right? When I talk about that, it's because of Alcoholics Anonymous and the God that you introduced me to. Not anything on my part, right? And so one of the things we did when we were in England was we had to do the pilgrimage, right? You got to do the pilgrimage to Winchester Cathedral, right? You got to find a tombstone of the Hampshire Grenadier, right? And the 1,000-year-old cathedrals in Europe are just amazing. They dwarf anything that's here, and you'll see these small towns that are, you know, 1 or 2 stories tall, and then there'll be these massive 1,000-year-old cathedrals. Winchester's like that. Massive 1,000-year-old cathedral. And so my wife, who's a history buff, we do a pilgrimage to Winchester, and we're looking out back for the Hampshire Grenadier tombstone, and it's not there. It's actually out front if you ever go there, and looking at the west wall. And my wife's a history buff, and you know, and you know, she's just fascinated with this window in the west wall of the Winchester Cathedral, you know. And it's a stained glass window that's 40 feet tall, 30 feet wide, but it doesn't have all the pictures of Jesus and all the scenes of the Bible that you usually see in these big cathedrals in Europe. It looks like a modern mosaic of all this color. And she's over there and she's reading a sign about it, and in the 1500s there was an English Civil War, and the cathedral, the windows were blown out by cannon fire and set on fire, and the whole cathedral was pretty much destroyed. And the townsfolk didn't have the money to rebuild the cathedral the way it was. They didn't have the money to commission new giant panes of stained glass from Italy that the original ones were. So what they began to do is they began to rebuild the cathedral themselves. And there was a master craftsman there who knew how to work with glass, and he had swept up all the debris from those windows, and I can imagine what they looked like. They're sharp, fractured. The edges were raw, and if you picked them up, they might cut you. And I think about in Alcoholics Anonymous when I talk about scrap heap of humanity, that's what I was, a piece of broken glass. And if you touched me, I'd cut you. I was dangerous. And the best thing you can do with something like that is throw it away so it doesn't hurt anybody. But this guy, a lot like we do here, he picked up those pieces, and he'd take, much like a piece of blue sea glass perhaps, right? It was probably really rough when it went in that ocean. A little bit rare, a little bit hard to find, and by it getting tumbled over and over and over again, by the suffering, by the friction of my drunkenness and by my sobriety and the things and the failures that I had and that you all had held me up over the years, over 34 years, you polished off the rough edges, right? And it doesn't cut you anymore. It actually feels good to touch it and hold it. And the guy in Winchester began to polish off the edges of those rough pieces of glass. And he'd wrap a little lead around them, and he rebuilt that window. And what you see today is a absolutely beautiful mosaic of broken glass, scrap heap of humanity. And what I see as I look out here today and the stories that I've heard sitting around the campfire last night and the stories that I've heard here today as I see the broken, ruptured, fractured lives that shouldn't even be here, should be thrown away. And what I see is God and Alcoholics Anonymous in this area wrap a little bit of protection, polish those edges. And then I see a beautiful mosaic of God's love and the power of Alcoholics Anonymous in front of me today. Thank you for letting me share with you. Thank you for having me here.